Welcome to Signal, the podcast that raises your frequency. I'm Maury Fontanez.
And I'm Melissa Grushka.
Bean, today we have a special guest to talk to us about spiritual accountability. Are you ready?
Very. That's it.
Bean, what's up?
Bean, what's up? Still working on getting this short hair in order.
Oh my God, we're still talking about the hair?
It's hard to fashion.
You know what? It's hard with headphones.
Oh, maybe that's it.
Yeah, that's the problem right now, is that you're having a headphone issue. But it looks, again, gorgeous. We will never use the word cute. How's your week? Wait, actually, let's not leave our guest waiting. We have a special guest this week, Bean.
Yes, we do. I love guest weeks. It's the most
So
fun.
let's go ahead and introduce her. But before I do let you have access to our incredible guest, did you say you're bored with me? I missed that.
It was a joke that you caught on too late.
Yeah, I did. Before we introduce our guest, we just want to ask you all a big favor. Listen, if you are listening and enjoying this show in any way, if it's helping
you are,
obviously, you keep coming back. If it's helping you in any way to learn more about yourself or feel like you're on a growth journey that's exciting to you, we're asking you right now to think of one person that you love enough that you want also to benefit from this show and share this podcast with one person today. That would be super supportive to us. And also, we think a nice little gift to your friend or loved one, right, Bean?
Agreed. Of course.
I'm always the one begging for listeners. You're just the angel over there.
No, I'm not. And I always tell people to go to YouTube. I don't even know why, but I'm always like, check out our YouTube. I think it's because I upload the video. So I feel like in the command of it. And I want the attention over there.
You want.
Correct. And I want people's opinion on my short blonde hair.
Please go look at her hair and give us some opinion.
For crying out loud.
All right. So we've left her waiting too long. We have the incredible Susannah Freedman joining us. She is a spiritual teacher and counselor, and she is here to talk to us about spiritual accountability. Susannah, welcome to the show.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here.
We are so excited to have you. I've been talking to you for a while about coming on, and we finally made it work. So
just here I am, 8 unanswered emails later. And I mean me unanswering them, me not answering them.
I was like, Maury, are you sure she wants to attend the show?
I think I finally texted you, please respond to Melissa or she's going to kill me and you both.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's right. Like so one of the things Maury and I have, maybe Maury wants to tell her favorite story about me saying I would do something and then just leaving. But yeah, right. No, so we have really bonded over our like ADHD stuff, which for me is like a newly realized thing. And I think I'm reveling in it a little too much.
Same.
Because now I feel like a lot less pressure to try to like fit into this way of being that doesn't work for me. But what that means is that some emails where I know the person's not going to get mad at me just get like pushed to the side. And
you're right.
That, that is what happened here.
I never even said it to you aggressively. I just was like, maybe we should just plan unless in case she doesn't show. That was all. I wasn't even like, how dare she? Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, let's have a backup plan for what we're going to record. I was like, Susannah would never not show, but she's not going to respond to you.
That's exactly true. I never will not show. You may never hear from me ever again.
Okay, Susannah, we have a million questions for you, but before we get into them, we like to do a little catch up called Cringe or Delight, just so that we can hear about each other's week. Bean, what do you got?
I have one, but you said I haven't shared it, but I feel like I shared it, but maybe I didn't share it about a hose.
Okay.
If this sounds familiar to anyone,
I feel like I would remember a story about a hose because that is just so tintillating.
I was walking down the street, taking a walk in my neighborhood when I noticed a gigantic pile of horse shit. And I thought, that's weird. Oh. Why would there be horse poop in the middle of my neighborhood? And then I'm walking, and as I'm staring at the horse poop, I step in dog poop, not paying attention because normally I'm looking. Also, big not shout out to the people who do not clean up after their dogs. It drives me insane. Anyway, I go home, I turn on the hose, I spray down my shoe that has particles all stuck in it. And then I'm going about my business. And about 7 hours later, I'm out with my kids in the front yard. My hose is in the backyard. And I'm noticing the mystery is kind of gone when I tell the story in this way, but I'm noticing there's like water pooling out of my front grass, like onto the ground, and it's moving. And I see it's moving down into the street. It's moving towards the sewer. And me and my kids are like staring at it, like, what is going on? Did a neighbor like empty their pool? It's a constant stream of water. I cannot figure it out. And then like, I mean, this is going on like we've become full detectives, like magnifying glasses, like touching things, places. Somehow me and one of my kids walk up and notice the flower bed is completely filled with water. And in that moment, I go, oh my God, I never turned the hose off. So my hose, Mother Earth is not pleased with me, had been running for 7 hours to the point that my whole backyard had filled up with water, and it came all the way down through my front yard and was now running a pool down. This spiritual accountability coach over there is giving me like Mother Earth dagger eyes. I did not do it intentionally. This is why it's my cringe. I left my hose on for 6 hours and it was just pouring water out.
Maybe you have ADHD.
Maybe. I think I wasn't like, it was like just getting to the hose season. You know, you don't use well, in these parts, we don't use our hoses all the time, right?
Right.
So I was just getting back into the hosing. Wasn't familiar. Wasn't thinking about the on and the off. There's so many pieces of the hose puzzle.
Right. It's a lot. Also, I have so many questions about this story. The biggest one being is that there seems to be a lot of different kinds of shit in your neighborhood. Is that an actual?
Yeah, I didn't really understand how that was related.
Why was there because she had to wash the dog shit off of her
I stepped in
shoe,
the dog
which is
shit while being distracted by the horse shit.
Yeah.
And then I could only get so much of the dog shit out of the shoe. So I had to turn on the hose.
Oh, yeah. I see.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But lots of shit. Horse shit in your neighborhood? Is there just horses?
There are horses like in this area. People do a lot of horse riding here because it's beautiful, but like not through residential neighborhoods. But there was no other explanation for what poop this was. Like I've seen a lot of horse shit in my day, and that was a pile of horse shit.
Wow. Well, Bean, I think that it's really amazing that you guys spent hours trying to figure out where this water was coming from, and
we were so curious. Yeah, we were so curious, and then I was to blame. That's kind of the joke's on me. You know what I mean?
Wow. Well, listen, while we're focused on you, actually, my delight has to do with you.
Oh, me?
I know. Delight, surprise, and delight. All right. So part of my delight from this week is that I have started this group session, which Susannah knows about, that I'm, always trying to think of ways for how I can keep coaching people when there's one of me and lots of humans. And so one way that I'm doing it now is to do group sessions and have like up to 10 people in a group. We meet once a month and we talk about, intuitive wisdom and healing our limiting belief systems. And I teach and I coach or whatever. Anyway, we had our first session. It was so wonderful. It went really well. Everyone vibed. It was a great kickoff. And one of the women that is in the group, I'm also mentoring. This person lives in London and we've met. And so they want to go off on a coaching journey themselves. And so I've so happy to mentor her. But we were talking in our mentoring session after this group session. And she said she's coming to this retreat that you're coming to, Bean, in September. And I said, really calmly. I was like, oh, cool. Guess who you'll also meet there? Because I know she listens to the podcast. Melissa. When I tell you, full starstruck excitement, like full, oh my God, not Melissa. I was like,
you left the hose on? Me?
The one who left, just silly Melissa leaving the hose on. Bean is going to be there. She goes, she claps her hands and she goes, oh my God, I love Melissa.
Oh, I am so honored.
I know. Yeah. So you've got fans just growing all around the world, Bean.
Wait, how did she find out about the retreat? How are we all in on this secret retreat?
It's a secret retreat that she knows the person who's organizing the retreat.
I think you might know her. Yeah.
Is it a secret retreat? Is it a secret?
But there's not a lot of, it's not like of all the people in all the world, there's only like how many people going? 11?
Well, the thing about Jennifer is that she's got tons. This is a Jennifer Freed retreat for those of you. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So the thing, she happens to be my stepmother, which is why I have the inside track on these things.
Thank you for connecting all the dots. People are listening being like, what are they talking about? And Susannah was like,
so Jennifer leads these retreats multiple times a year. And the one she does every year, one of them is in Ojai, California. Yeah. And she has her retreats, I think she always lets them out to like her clubs first and the
Yeah.
people she knows, and then they just fill. So she has no reason to like announce it more
Right.
publicly, because like the number of spaces she has is commensurate basically with like the people who are going to sign up immediately anyways. So
Right.
Yeah.
that's why they're not like all over her social
Promoted.
media or whatever. Yeah, they just fill
Yes.
up immediately.
Right. And Bean
Yes.
is coming to her first one,
I am
and
so
you
grateful.
have a fan waiting for you.
That's exciting.
All right, Susannah, we've given you enough time to
Oh, God.
prepare, and now
Yeah.
you're aware that it doesn't have to be anything that interesting. We just
I don't
heard
know
about
that hose story. I know, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Talk about
tantalizing. Like,
Yeah, I know.
you
Riveting.
know, it was entertaining.
It had all the
Bullshit.
qualities of a good story.
Yeah. Even if the content was a hose, you know, it's still
So
what a good
that,
exercise in like making a hose very interesting.
Thank
Yeah. I had one. I was trying to think of something cringy because that happens a lot, but then I like was very gratified to realize that not much cringy stuff has happened this week, and that could be because my partner and his son are in Arizona, so I don't have anybody to embarrass myself in front of. You know what I mean?
That is
Like
so
I'm not
nice.
being called out. I'm a stepmom to 2 teenagers, and so I'm not being called out right now on like
Right.
the weird shit I'm doing.
Blessings.
Don't you feel
Yeah.
extra cringy with teenagers around?
Oh my God. They're always like,
Yeah.
because then I'll say something they said last week. You know, they
Right.
call me Zuzu and they're like, Zuzu, what are you talking about? I'm like, what do you mean? What am I talking about? You just said this last week. And they're like, ugh.
It's not cool
So
anymore.
out of touch.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
problem is, I think we all think we're cool. and then
100%.
They are the quickest to put us in our place.
Yeah.
I'm
But isn't that
Well, you're
so
cool
funny?
with that haircut. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
That's not
It's-
what the kids think.
It is funny. Like everyone at their own age thinks that they're like the barometer of cool. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like,
Well,
no,
we really are.
you guys should be looking at us about what's cool.
Obviously.
And they're like,
Agreed.
why can I see your ankles? Why aren't you wearing socks that are higher?
Or did you take a picture of your feet? Or like, are your feet in the picture?
Yeah.
That's a one that's not allowed.
Wait,
so
you can't
weird.
have feet
We'll
in the
explain
picture?
it to you later, Bean. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can.
I haven't
No.
done high socks yet either, but I really want to
No,
get
me
there.
neither. I
Maybe
might
my
get there
short
this
hair.
summer. I'm not sure.
Me too. I'll follow you.
Also,
Okay,
I just
well,
wanted to
tell us
say, oh yeah, okay. I could
No,
go off on
say
so
it.
many tangents because I was going
I
to be
know.
like hose season. Like I grew up in California. I've lived in California my whole life. I'm like, you mean all year season?
That's why I
Yeah,
said in
right.
these parts, in these
Right,
them parts.
yeah.
Right.
Although we have
Um,
times where we're not allowed to use our hoses because we are in a drought, people.
Right.
I don't
We
think
have
we're in a
times
drought
where
right
ours
now,
is.
are we?
No, I know, but there's times, you know.
No,
There's
for sure.
seasons.
I grew up in a drought, and it was like we had strict rules.
You know what?
Did you also
Um,
walk to
Wait,
school
I have
3
to
miles
say
barefoot?
that this
No.
this conversation is cluing me in as to why they think we're not cool.
Oh,
Huh.
Right.
yeah.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the look of realization on all of our faces.
Yeah.
I was
Uh,
like,
we
wait,
did
oh.
just realize that we aren't cool.
Huh.
You
Let's
said we're in
listen
a
to-
drought. Yeah, go.
Yeah.
Tell
Okay.
us her delight.
Jesus.
My
Christ.
delight. Yeah. So I did have a really sweet delight. So this retreat that we were both on where we met, Maury and I in Bali, it was like full of really incredible people. And I gave a lot of astrology readings on that retreat because Jennifer didn't want to, which is fine. I'm happy to, and I wanted to. And part of the work that I do is intuitive healing stuff as well. And I just kind of mix it all together, including coaching. It's just sort of like a, hodgepodge of
Smorgasbord.
help. But I had a session with this one woman and she like sent me this really kind, amazing testimonial video. And she was like, please use this. Like, please put it on your social media, put it on your website.
I love that.
And it was just like, I don't know, so heartfelt. And I really respect her and admire the work that she's doing in the world. And so it was just really sweet to get that and to be able to put that out there. I'm really horrible at self-promotion. And so, it was nice having someone else say some things that I could just like put
You
up
deserve
online.
it.
Nice.
Wait,
Thank
I have
you.
a guess on who it is. When we stop recording, I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Wow.
I'm
I
gonna
mean,
tell you what name the
it might be
popped into my
down
head
now. It was,
intuitively.
yeah. I'm sure you know who it was, but yeah.
That's really
nice,
sweet.
guys.
You deserve that.
That's way
Actually,
Thank you.
better than a hose.
Way better than a host. That actually is a really great transition. So, Susannah, we wanted to have you on. We always like to say why we want to do the topic of the episode we're doing. And so, as Bean and I were talking about, how we can keep focusing on some of the topics we talk about around mindfulness and focus on self and, evolving your consciousness. I was talking about you and I said, my friend Susannah is a spiritual accountability coach, and she has a lot of really fascinating things to say about spirituality and our role in embracing it in a way that is the most productive and effective in our lives. So we asked you to come on. You have such an interesting and deep background that allows you to really go deep on stuff. I've really rarely met people who can take a concept and give you the history of it, explain the spiritual concepts of it, and then bring it back to a pragmatic place. So that's what we're hoping you're going to do. You've been a yoga teacher for 15 years. You have your master's in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. You're a trained astrologer. So there is so much we can talk to you about. And we're just really happy to have you here. And we want to start with, actually, no, Bean, I'm going to give you the first question.
I just wanted to know, when you set it up.
Your mouth is open.
which is like a constant with guests. I can't, I'm always amazed that people are talking to, I love it. When Maury asked you how you wanted to be referred to up top, you already listed off those incredible things. And now I need more. I need more. I want to hear your background, your training. I want it all.
Yeah. So it's always an interesting question because it's where do I start? And the truth is, I was born on a Wednesday. But
the year was
1984 actually.
Wow.
No, but the truth is that I was really born into a spiritual household. My dad had both my parents were major hippies, and my dad had followed Swami Muktananda, who is this teacher out of India who had come to the States and gained quite a following. And then he introduced my mom to these concepts. I don't know if it was a complete introduction, but she started going to these meetings as well. And so then, they started the Waldorf school in Santa Barbara when I was very young, so that my sister had somewhere to go. So they've always just been sort of drawn to spirituality that isn't as affiliated with a religion. My mom's Episcopalian, my dad's Jewish. So we did grow up with those holidays as well. And then my godparents, who the mother was my mom's best friend, and her kids are exactly the same age as me and my brother and my sister. And my godbrother's 10 days older than I am. And we're sort of spiritual twins. And but they would go to India often. And they met this man named Panditji while they were there. And he came back to the States, and he was sort of known in India, but not at all known in the States. He now is the most well-known guru, modern day guru in India. His name is Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. That's his name in his role, or Gurudev. But he would just come and do satsang, which is gathering together to hear teachings. And so I started going to that when I was really, really young. Went to Hindu Sunday school when I was really little. So all of this stuff was really, I didn't have to search any of this stuff out. It was all just given to me. And then as we got older, things just change, and we sort of fell away from that. But I went to my middle school. I went to Santa Barbara Middle School, for those of you who know Santa Barbara. And they had a really strong tie with a sister school in Tibet. And so we would learn a lot about different Tibetan traditions and Tibetan Buddhism and all this stuff. So I was just really lucky that it was part of my education growing up.
Your childhood is cooler than my entire life.
Totally.
Yeah. No, my childhood was definitely amazing. I don't try to pretend that's not the case at all. It's magical. Yeah. The facts are the facts, magical, incredible existence. So then I sort of like put all of that off to the side and did the whole like teenager, like, I don't believe in God, blah, blah, blah. But even though like I very much did, I just didn't want to admit it. And then when I was in a yoga class when I was 19, and it's sort of weird, but like I was actually talking about this in yoga Sunday school on Sunday. I looked up at the ceiling. I was in a Bikram yoga class of all types of yoga. And I looked up at the ceiling, which you lay down between these postures and your eyes are supposed to be open. And I just had this moment of like such overwhelm of like, oh yeah, hi, how are you? How have you been? Like just this reconnection with what I call God, which is not denominational. Other people call it spirit or source or the divine or whatever. I love the name God. And so since then, it was like steadily just gaining more information. When I was 25, I did my yoga teacher training. And I had been fully on like being an actor path. Like I had lived in LA, I had an agent, lived in Australia, worked with a theater company there. And then the first day of my yoga teacher training, I was like, oh, I guess I'm done with all of that. Like it was just like done. Wow. And so, yeah, then I started teaching, and the spiritual and philosophical piece of it has always just been like so profoundly transformative for me, but also recognizable. Like it doesn't at all feel like I'm necessarily learning something new. It feels like I'm getting reacquainted with things just at much deeper levels. And then, through my graduate program and consciousness studies, really learning about how all these traditions from the East have really affected Western psychology, especially. And in studying these ancient texts, like how much of what we consider to be like mental health now and steps that we take to promote mental health, how much of that is actually just written in these thousands of years old texts,
Awesome.
And like neuroscience keeps like proving these 1,000-year-old texts true. They're like, turns out you have grooves in the brain when you think. And every yogi who's studied this stuff is like, really? No way.
No doubt.
And you can change them. That's crazy. So the idea of neuroplasticity is not new to the yogis, and has been written about for thousands of years. So all these things, it was just like, okay, this is what feels like the most resonant to me. It's what feels the most authentic to me. And then between then and now, I've just sort of been like, I wouldn't say collecting, but doing deep dives into different modalities to see what else fits. And the intuitive work is part of that. The intuitive healing work is part of that. And then astrology, I've been brought up with astrology as well. So that's just a framework that I use to help understand people pretty quickly. I don't know what astrologers you've had on the show, if any, but like
Jennifer has been on the show.
Jen Freed.
Well, so you've had the best. But astrology, like she's heard it many times. I've heard it so many times where people are like, you just said something that it took me 4 years to get to in therapy. Yes. And I'm like, just by looking at a chart, yeah. and I'm like, therapy's amazing. I love therapy. I also think that sometimes it's like, why take 4 years to get to that?
Right.
You know what I mean? So astrology is just very helpful for me to see like exactly what's going on, what this person is working with, so that when I'm speaking to them or offering them guidance or whatever, it's from like what they can understand, from what they can handle, not from some sort of like ideal of this is how you should do things, because that just doesn't work. None of us can stick with that. So that was long-winded, but that's sort of my background.
No, I love that. What were there any modalities you tried that you were like, this isn't for me?
I mean, there are some that I just know, like everybody's like, oh, are you going to do Vedic astrology, which is the, Indian astrology. I'm like, no, that's not, I've learned some of it, but it just doesn't resonate with me in the same way.
Right.
Or people, because I'm a yoga teacher, people always wonder if I'm going to do some sort of like Thai massage or something. I'm like, fuck no. Like,
I'm a challenge. All right.
just because I
You
teach yoga
should.
doesn't mean that I like want to wear flowy pants all the time. And, you know,
I want you
like,
to,
Shop
though.
at Chico's.
yeah, exactly. So
What's wrong with
more
Chico's?
stuff like that. Yeah. Maybe I should like
Um,
go ahead.
Yeah. Why are
Sorry.
you guys being so judgy?
no, I always, Chico's is just, listen, Chico's is very Dorothy from Golden Girls core. And as anyone who knows me knows that she's my icon in life. So in no way is that a dig. It's a compliment. Chico's. If I say it, you better feel complimented.
Maybe Chico's will
Susanna,
sponsor you.
yeah, maybe.
Oh, that would be
This episode
delightful.
is sponsored by Chico's.
Hilarious.
All right. So let's get to the core of where our listeners can really draw inspiration and really clarity for themselves. What do you mean when you say spiritual accountability? Can you define that for us as we enter this conversation?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this because I haven't come up with one like succinct sort of soundbite of what I mean by spiritual accountability, which I probably should just for like sales.
Now's your
purposes.
time.
We'll
Do it right
workshop.
here.
Yeah.
We can workshop
We
this.
can workshop
Okay.
this. No, but for me, spiritual accountability is every day doing something. I don't care how big it is, how small it is, but every day doing something that reminds you either of the highest, so spirit, God, or of your highest. So, like, spiritual integrity to me, you know, at its core definitely has to do with each of our connection to God, and that each of us is, if God is the sun, each of us is a ray of the sun. If God is the ocean, each of us is a wave. We come out of it, we go back into it. Each wave is different. Each wave has its own characteristics. Each wave lasts certain lengths of time. It may do damage. It may be beautiful. It may whatever, but it all comes from the same place and goes back into the same place. So doing something to remind yourself of that every day, that like you're not your ego, you're not your job, you're not what you accomplish. Your worth is not tied up in, and your value is not tied up in anything quantifiable. Like that is not true, you know? And there's nothing you can do. Nothing is outside of the scope of love. Nothing is outside of the scope of God. And therefore you can never be outside of that, you know? So something to remind yourself of that every day. If spirituality doesn't speak to you, still, I would tell clients, like, I just wouldn't talk about God. And I would just say, what can you do every day to bring out your highest? What is the highest version of you? What does that look like? Because for most people, it still has a lot of overlap with spiritual principles. For most people, the highest version of themselves is someone who's very generous, is someone who's patient, is someone who's kind, is all of these who doesn't cause harm. You know, for most people, their highest version of themselves has a lot to do with what I would break down in terms of like what spirit, as humans, how we can get closest to spirit, you know? So, again, that's a very long-winded way of saying that I think spiritual integrity and accountability is like really about daily practice to lift yourself up, you know?
Oh, I really love that. But why do you, what does it matter? How does it benefit us to keep ourselves accountable?
Sure.
Like, what if we just
I
were
think that
spiritual,
there's,
but we weren't tapping into, we weren't holding ourselves to a certain standard?
yeah. So I would call that phony spirituality.
Oh, ouch.
And I would call that spiritual
Shots
bypass.
fired. Bean.
Not to say that your love of spirit or energy or whatever you do isn't real. Like it's all real. But accountability, in the word accountability, like discipline is sort of inherently a part of that word, you know?
Yes.
And like all these old teachings, these sacred texts talk about discipline being the way to freedom. You know, if you don't have any rail guards on anything, you never
Right.
really know what the right path is. You don't know what to do. So spiritual accountability and being disciplined in that way, definitely, in one way it can feel like it limits your possibilities, but in another way it just clarifies the answers. It's like there's a lot less confusion, you know? And I think that you can talk about this in the way of intuition as well. Like if you listen to your intuition, which I would say the yogis, like the text would say, intuition is the part of the mind and spirit connection that is the closest to God. Um, there are all these different layers of the mind. They're each important for being a human being, but that part of it is the closest to like really hearing God. So, you know, it's just a lot of clarity. It adds a lot of clarity. Um, and it's a muscle, you know, like it is because of the way our brains are wired. It is more likely that we will immediately go to judging another person and then believing that judgment, judging ourselves and then believing that judgment. It's just a really, really old mechanism of keeping ourselves safe. Like that part of our consciousness has not evolved to our state of existence, right? Like we're not in danger all the time, hopefully. Some people are, unfortunately, but many of us are not. And so, but our mind still does that. So you have to build a different muscle in order to have your mind go a different way. So if you immediately judge someone, but you don't hold on to it and you get curious instead, there's so much good that comes from that. You know, there's so much possibility for healing that comes from that. There's so much possibility for new experience that comes from that. When we're in less of a place of needing to be right, when we're in less of a place of holding on to our beliefs super strongly and allowing space for what other people say, like kindness is more possible. So I always like talk about in physical yoga practice, you know, because I teach public yoga classes as well. I always talk about how yoga is teaching us how to be like, yes, you can do cool things with your body, but it's teaching you how to be less of an asshole. Like that's really what this practice is. Less of an asshole to yourself, less of an asshole to other people. And I think that's just like really important right now in the world.
Totally.
You know?
Do you feel like you are constantly in tune with your intuition since you do all this accountability work?
I wouldn't say constantly. I would say a lot of the time. For me, where it gets really muddy is when my own emotional, when it's about my own emotional life and my own emotional connections with really close friends or family or partners or something like that. If it's about a situation that's less emotional for me, then I pretty much like no, you know, and that's why with clients, I generally have really strong intuition. But I would say like I've been doing this work really diligently now, regularly for over 20 years. And my ability to handle hard things and what I do with those hard things has changed completely over those 20 years, not just because I'm 20 years older, but based on these precepts. And one thing that I wanted to say before about like personally, why would you do it is I suffer a lot less than most other people I know.
Right. Right.
Like even if I'm in acute suffering, it lasts less time. Or I at least have a deeper understanding and awareness or idea of why this stuff may be happening. And so I'm not going to, I trust reality. I trust God. And so I'm not second guessing why something is happening, which is in Buddhism, what they would call the second arrow. Like shit happens, it's painful. What we make of it makes it more or less painful. And spiritual accountability allows me to make it less painful.
Yeah, I love that. When I, talk to people about this concept of higher self, I say this thing that is so in parallel to what you're saying, which is that you don't have to believe in your higher self for it to be working in your highest good at all times. It does that on autopilot constantly. However, the faith in and the belief in higher self allows you to suffer less along the way.
100%.
Because you don't feel as isolated. You don't feel that you have to be in control of every detail. You have faith in something much bigger than your human form that is going to support you along the way. Let me ask you, like, we like to be really, what do you call them, being tactical tools? We like to be really pragmatic.
It was 3 T's. I can't remember the third T. Something tangible, tactical, tactical
tools. We like to be practical on the show because we want our listeners to walk away and just be able to, like, today start practicing spiritual accountability. So what are some ways that people can practically build this accountability into their spiritual life or their personal growth journey?
Yeah. So there's a reason why meditation is always pushed so hard in spiritual practice. And I think people just have a little bit of a misunderstanding of how they could start that process. And so it seems really overwhelming. Like, I think when most people hear meditation, they think like, I'm going to have to sit for an hour and then and not think of anything. And then you sit down and within 2 seconds, you're thinking about something. And, you know, so, but meditation is teaching us how to drop into the seat of the witness so that we can see what's happening rather than being only caught up and involved in what's happening. Right. So, I think that having some sort of meditative practice so you can start to see what you're caught up in is really important. Like what you're attached to, because where our attachments are or where we are the most caught in are probably like behaviors that are detrimental to us and to others, right? When those attachments get triggered. And so this is actually something from Shirzad Shamin, who's a coach and who I did a course with. But he talks about, you know, moving from the fight, flight, freeze, fawn part of the brain into like the more peaceful part of the brain, which he calls the sage mind. And it's actually pretty quick that can happen. And so what I regularly tell clients to do who don't have a meditation practice is to at least once a day, but ideally a couple times a day, only for 2 minutes, rub 2 fingers together and try to feel the ridges of each fingertip against the other, only for 2 minutes, and just see what that does. It immediately downshifts the nervous system. Like every client I've ever given this to says like, I feel so much better. It feels so good. They notice a huge difference when they don't do it. So that starts a type of meditative practice, because meditation for us really is just concentration. And it allows people to see sort of the efficacy of like, if I just pause for a second, what can that do for me? And what part of myself can I access? And generally people make better decisions from like what he calls the sage part of the mind, you know, this calmer part of the mind.
I love that tool. So accessible.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I started doing it right while we were talking.
Yeah, I did too when she was talking.
Yeah. And it's amazing because I did that I don't do it regularly anymore, but I did it for a really long time. And it became sort of a Pavlov's dog situation where anytime I would touch 2 fingers together, or I would just start doing it, and immediately I would remember to like step back a little bit, even if I didn't stop what I was doing, even if I didn't close my eyes for 2 minutes, it just became this thing where I was like, oh, right. Okay. You know, and that's like, there are a lot of tools like that in spiritual practice, like mantra repetition or holding a mala or something like that.
Oh, I love that. So we're holding ourselves accountable. We're doing the things. We're keeping in touch with ourselves and everything. But what happens when you fall off the wagon for a little and you're not doing your practices as they should be done? How do you maintain like a sense of calm and not go to a place of shame and judgment towards yourself, and allow for more forgiveness when you are not practicing in the way that you should be?
Yeah.
So Cat has a lot to say about your question.
Oh my God.
So I was like, do I have a cat? It sounded like it was right here.
My cats
You-
really love to be quiet until I get on a client call or something like this. And then they're just
They
like,
want your attention.
why aren't we being featured? I'm
Yes.
sure one of them will jump on my lap at some point.
Yes. Your cats are Leos like you.
They're not, actually.
Yeah.
I don't want to get so
Nice
technical
try.
about it, but they're actually
Okay,
Libras. Libras are pretty
Oh.
dramatic also, though. Anyways.
Are they right?
So I will just say, speaking of astrology, that like knowing someone's astrology chart or knowing your own chart is a really good way for me to help people move past shame, because I can see like where that's being triggered, why it's being triggered, what the shame is about.
Ah.
Because shame feels different for everybody to a certain degree, and it rests in different places for everybody.
Interesting.
But overall, like big picture is the Bhagavad Gita, which is very often referred to as like the Hindu Bible. Aside from the Bible, it's the second most widely read text in the world. And it really is in that lineage what we would call the text for householders, meaning people who aren't living in ashrams, people who are having kids, who are working, who are doing all these things. And it teaches us sort of how to live a spiritual life in a material world. And Krishna, who is an incarnation of one of the deities, so Krishna you can just think of as God, comes down and is incarnated as this charioteer. And one of those things that he said is basically there is no falling off the spiritual path. Like every step that you take when you decide to get back on the path will be right there. Like all the work that you've done is cumulative. So you're not losing anything.
Nice.
Even if it's dormant, it's going to be woken up. It's not extinct. So I think just having some faith in that. And then also in terms of, God doesn't care. Like this idea of shame is so human,
Yeah.
and animals that we associate shame with are generally like domesticated animals that I think only experience that because humans teach them that, but
sorry,
like, I know, right? It's like they're just doing what they do, and then we're teaching them
And
to
we're
feel
like,
bad
no.
about it. Yeah. But anyhow, I could go on and on about animals.
We
But-
wanted to do a pod on animals before, didn't we? And their intuitive abilities.
We are going to do an episode on intuitive animals and plants. So come back, Susannah.
I don't know that I should be on that episode. I would happily
Yeah.
listen to it, but I don't think I have
Let
any
us know
like
what you think.
anything to say about it. So, God always loves you regardless of what you do, regardless of who you are. There is no shame. Like karma is just reality rolling itself out. It's just what's happening. And God is that thing, So that obviously, yeah, and you're that thing too.
He
Yelling
agrees.
on that truth.
Amen. Amen.
You're that takes a long time for many people to work into that deep of a belief, right? Like that's a lot to be like, God is everything, even the suffering, and therefore like there's nothing to be ashamed about. Because also like the idea that God would shame you is just so old Bible, Old Testament. Like that's just not the type of divinity that I believe in. And so combating the shame is a longer process, I would say, because it's so ingrained in us. And especially if you come from a religious background, it's extremely ingrained. But my big thing about stepping back on is choosing something that you can do every day, choosing something that you can maintain. So there are these principles in yoga. One of them is, and they're considered to be like pillars of practice. And in Sanskrit, one of them is abhyasa, which means consistent practice. And what's not written, but is, sort of acknowledged, is that it's consistent practice over a long period of time. That's what makes the biggest difference.
Mm.
Yeah. Just make yourself known for a second.
Come be on the podcast.
Welcome.
Buddy.
Oh, hi.
Look at that gorgeous cat.
This is his name's Face.
Face?
Yeah, Face.
He's serving face right now.
Yeah.
He's
His
giving
name
us a
is
real
really
face.
Frankie the Face. But
Oh.
so, you know, I notice a huge difference. I'm less inconsistent now with practice than I used to be. But even when if I'm going on vacation or I'm just out of my routine or whatever, I definitely notice a difference and feel a difference, you know, in terms of my ability to be more patient, in terms of my feeling of connection and all these things.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, if you feel like you've fallen off the wagon or you even want to start or whatever the case, wherever you are, you always want to be honest with yourself. You know,
Right.
like you always want to start where you are. I can't believe this
That's
cat.
It's
I'm so sorry.
Don't
We
totally
let him
fine.
outside. We let him outside and now like
He wants to live out there.
he does want to live
Yeah.
out there, but I'm not ready for him to go on the street. Hi.
He's a
Just
street cat.
You are, he was been outside one time. He is definitely not a street cat.
Well, he
Um,
loved it.
yeah. So just choosing something that you can maintain, which is why that 2 minutes is so helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
Just doing something you can do every day that you know you can do every day, that you don't really have an excuse not to do. And then also something that you find to a certain degree enjoyable. You know what I mean? Like if you're sitting, like Ram Dass was and is one of my greatest teachers. And I would say like guides for sure. But if you're sitting, he would say, like, if you're sitting in meditation being like, I fucking hate this. When is this going to be over? I don't want to be doing this. Just get up.
Right.
Stop doing it. You're equating spiritual practice with like torture at that point, you know?
Right.
And spiritual practice is really personal, and it has to feel really personal in order for it to be sustainable and maintainable.
So true. All right. So Susannah, you mentioned the idea of, shame being a part of, one very specific religion and Western religion, which brought up this question for me, which is, a lot of what you're talking about can sound like or is grounded in Buddhism and Hinduism. How can you think about spiritual accountability and this work if you are of a different religion or a different background, if you're Muslim, if you're Christian? Like, how does this relate to other forms of religious spiritual thinking? How can you stay in this headspace?
Yeah, that is a really tricky question because it really depends on how deep a person is into their religion, how much they believe in it, and like how much those more strict principles, which are like bastardizations of original teachings, let's just like get that straight. How attached they are to that being the way. If someone is super attached to like, self-flagellation being your penance and your way out of doing something or out of whatever you feel you should be ashamed of, there's nothing really I can do or anybody can say to talk you out of that. That person would need to have their own experience of religiosity or spirituality in a different way to be moved off that needle, right? So for some people, it's just like, that's the path you're on. And one of the things that the text says is like, whatever you choose to do it fully and completely. So like, if you're going to be a hardcore Catholic, go for it. Be a fucking hardcore Catholic. But like, then don't derivate from that path unless you're willing to leave it. You know what I mean? Because the other thing that I know is that I have no idea what the truth is ultimately. Like, I have very strong feelings. I believe reincarnation is a thing, but there could be a heaven, there could be a hell. I don't know.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So everyone is doing what they think is right. And one of the things that spiritual practice has given me and taught me is that everyone is just trying to be happy, period. And everyone is searching for that happiness in a different way. There's this phrase, Satchitananda, which means truth, consciousness, and bliss or happiness, Ananda. Like I was sitting with this Swami, who was here from India. And he was saying, like, all of us are after happiness because it is a part of what the soul actually is. You know, the soul is truth, the soul is consciousness, and the soul is happiness, the soul is bliss. And so for people who are really bought into their religion, then I wouldn't touch it. I'd just be like, you do you, you know.
Right.
For people who are struggling with like growing up in religious households and having a really hard time using the word God or seeing any of this as using the word spirituality at all, like having that be a part of this at all. I just talk about it like mental health. Like,
Right.
do you want to keep suffering in this way or do you not want to keep suffering in this way?
Right.
Because attachment and non-attachment doesn't have to have anything to do with spirituality. Becoming the seat of coming into the seat of the witness doesn't have to have anything to do with spirituality. You know,
Right.
trusting reality doesn't have to have anything to do with spirituality. It
Right.
helps, but you can still do a lot of these things. Like I wouldn't tell someone to do mantra repetition or talk to God all the time, you know, if they have a real hang up about that. But I would tell somebody like, take 2 minutes, watch your thoughts.
Yeah.
If you're watching, one last thing is like, if you are watching your own thoughts, that means you are not your thoughts. So if you're not your thoughts, what are you?
Yes.
Right.
Which is such an opening. And it goes back to this concept of it doesn't have to be about religion or spirituality, but it is about not suffering in this human experience. So
100%.
much. And, you know, I think that just to slightly push you on one point, I have a slightly different perspective. I agree with 98% of what you said. But to me, you know, when I'm coaching people who have grown up in a very strict religious environment, what I will say is, okay, that is your training, but I would like you to just ask, who came up with these concepts? Who wrote these things down? And to what end? What was the intention behind this teaching? And to just be able to tell the difference between what the teaching creates in your body, what the teaching creates in your emotions and how you feel about yourself versus what it feels to be at peace, what it feels to be in a place of self-love, what it feels to be in a place of self-acceptance. And just test the difference between the two and see, is there an opening here where, sure, I can stay committed to my religion, but can I expand my definition of some of these concepts, but beyond what the original author wrote, that has more to do with a felt sense for peace, clarity, truth within me? Does that?
I completely agree with that. I think I'm talking about a person who is not ready for that versus a person who is ready for that.
They're definitely not listening to this episode, that person. I'll tell you that.
That person. Unless they're like stuck in a car with like, you know.
Someone who is, that's true.
They're
that's
like
true.
Crazy aunt, whatever.
Yes.
You know.
We like to define our audience as spiritually curious.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you're spiritually curious. All right. Well, listen, I like to let Bean ask the very last question of our guest. So Bean, what do you got for Susannah?
I want to know how you hold yourself spiritually accountable. What are your personal practices?
So my personal practices evolve and change. Right now, my spiritual accountability, there's always some sort of meditative practice. What that meditation is changes. Right now, it has a lot more to do with connecting to spirit, and getting myself ready to read for other people, like intuitive readings, not necessarily astrology, although they're very often combined. But so right now, my spiritual accountability is a lot about making sure that I'm like empty enough, clear enough to be in their energetic field rather than like in my own bullshit. So that's a specific meditation. A big part of my own spiritual accountability, which has been the case for the last 20 years, is reading some sort of spiritual text every day. And that could be like, originally that was like classical yogic texts. But now I think about that as anything that reminds me of my highest, anything that like lifts me up to the highest. So, my definition of that is much more broad than other people's would be in terms of like that specific part of practice. But that's a huge part of it. You know, like every morning I rest my mind on something that reminds me of my true orientation, so that that sets the tone for the day, you know. Like this morning when I was making coffee, I was listening to this Om Namah Shivaya chant. That is from that first guru that I had that I was telling you all about, you know. So it's like, it doesn't have to be, some days I don't have time to sit and read for a long time. And so then I'll open a book to a page, and like there are a few books from my lineage that you can open it to any page and get like a really important lesson, you know.
Oh, wow.
So that has been listening to something or reading something in the morning that lifts me to my highest or reminds me of my highest or just reminds me of reality and truth. That's like a huge part of my own practice. And then chanting. I do a lot of devotional chanting. So that's...
You guys have to check out Susannah's chanting album on Spotify. Her voice is truly sent from the heavens. She is phenomenal. So actually, Susannah, you are so full of insight, inspiration, clarity. Where can our listeners find you and engage with you more?
Thank you. So yeah, I have an album on Spotify. It's called Ringing the Bells. And it's like not totally indicative of what I do when I chant live, but it still is like, I made it with a friend and really love it. But I would say the best way right now to, you know, work with me or just be in my sort of like ecosystem and is following me on Instagram or signing up for my newsletter. Because that's where I let people know about courses that I'm offering, like, or online healings that I'm doing or anything like that. So,
and where can they follow you or find those courses?
So, my website is Susannah-Freedman.com. And there should be like a pop-up to sign up for my newsletter on there. So I'm redoing my website right now. I'm also like not the best at keeping it 100% up to date. So the newsletter really is the best way to find out like exactly what's going on in real time. And then my Instagram is, what is my Instagram? My Instagram is, I think it's _Susannah Freedman _ I think that's
We will link to all of these places in our show notes, so no worries. Susannah, thank you so much. You were so generous with your time and your teachings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really, really, really profound conversation. And come back and talk to us again. We really love having you.
It's been great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, thank you for listening. And we will have another episode for you next week. So stay tuned. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.